Well, hello. It's me. So we've got Trouble in Prison, but we've also got a very short queue, which is putting Threepio together. So let's have a look at this one first because it's extremely short. So I'm actually going to do. I'm going to combine this into one video. I think it sort of makes sense, really. And I'm not going to dwell too much on this particular one. So really, there's a lovely sort of neutrality about this particular queue, although it's extremely short. It's only 16 bars long. We've got some sort of rather unusual things here. So we've got sort of sad Chewie trying to repair 3PO just on the oboe. What I'm going to do to do a request is actually sort of turn on the keyboard. So we've got that sort of rather nice sort of angular line. It's not sort of angular in terms of intervals; they're sort of rather simple. So we've got those sorts of things going on. It's quite sort of neutral. There's an absence of thirds, pretty much. I mean, there's only one here. Otherwise, we've got sort of tone, fourth, tone, fifth, third, and then fourth again. So it's one of those sort of ones where he tries to avoid thirds at that point, and you get nice sort of neutrality to it. And then amongst that, you've then got sort of ambiguous echo of the previous cue. If you sort of have a look at the top line, it's very similar to like that. Just in terms of the interval space, but only the first sort of four notes, really, for the first 4 or 5 notes or so. So he's very good at being neutral. And at this point, we don't really know if 3PO is actually repairable. So this is the Dyads. And this is where it gets ambiguous. So when he uses a major second dyad here, you're expecting it to go outwards. In other words, the top note goes outwards. And the bottom note goes downwards as well. And it's quite a sort of interesting little technique that he uses quite often, actually. So unusual as well just for the oboe on its own. And then we just got violins, which echo that oboe outline. And then we get into a chord structure. So the bottom structure is an A with a flat six. Like that. You can't really see that little one. I'm going to highlight it a little bit. So we got A with a flat six, but with C in the bass, which is part of the sort of Starry Night chord, really. So it's all over Star Wars, that chord. So we've got that, and then we've also got an E minor chord as well at the top as well. So all of those combined give us this sort of rather nice, interesting sort of harmony, like that, which is rather rich. So although it's 634, it's not really a mystic chord. It's not used in that way. It's more of a sort of C sharp altered scale or A mixolydian with a flat six. That sort of idea. An interesting sort of little combination of chords at that point. And that's a bit as 3PO comes to life. That's the sort of chord that is used just on the piano. Just very delicately with the little flutes accentuating the celeste at that point as well. And the harp just doing the sort of the chordal stuff. It's a lovely sort of delicate moment. I really like it. And then we've got this little droid theme. Like that as well, which is a sort of hexatonic chord here. We can tell really because of the... like that all of those notes combined give us this, like that, B flat hexatonic or 620. So we've got sort of some of the usual subsets which go with it, and in actual fact, a lot of this is harmonized with all of those chord tones, but it's not quite. So this is why I tend to think that Williams relies upon these hexatonic, Hungarian minor, octatonic scales, because it's not necessarily obvious to do that. You know, most people would go, you know, just with a B flat chord, but he doesn't quite do that. So he puts that seventh in, that B flat major seventh, and thus it works because we've got all of those notes in the hexatonic, and it works very well. If you added a C sharp to it, it wouldn't make any difference at all, because like that, because it's part of that scale set. Really interesting there. And then we go off into just a straightforward B flat chord. Notice the second inversion. Probably it's important just to reiterate that, because he uses second inversions quite a lot when he's transitioning from one chord area to another. So we're going to C chord and then suddenly a tertial modulation to A flat. And then if we've come from B flat hexatonic, because it really ends there after that sort of brief bar, we then have another tertial modulation to D minor. And then that's where we get our Imperial March in the trombones and horns. And it's a good segue to Han as he's being sort of lowered into the sort of torture bed, I suppose. And then we've got one of the classic sort of chords. So E flat minor with a major seventh. There we go. Notice the slight change in the harmony of the Imperial March, where we got sort of a minor third, major third. From below the melody note at that point. And then we got sort of very, very high artificial harmonics as well in that. Violas are an octave lower as well, it's worth pointing out. So that's really that's it for that cue. That's not very much going on. So I will leave that there and then go straight on to the next one, which is Trouble in Prison. And it's interesting that having ended with the Imperial March, we start with the Imperial March, this time with bass clarinet and bassoons, which is quite unusual. Usually it's in the trombones and or horns. Similar harmonisation where here we've got now a minor third below the tune, whereas before we had a major third below the tune. And it's very much sort of going into that sort of wrong note bass area, as we've had many times before. So C sharp minor and a pedal. So we've got this little Imperials derivation. I call it that because I sort of think that in all of this brilliant catalogue by Frank. Let's just have a quick look at this. You know, if you have a look at the chords here, like that, and often it's over a pedal, like that. So it's that sort of minor third type idea. That's the derivation anyway. So I'm sort of thinking, well, it's using exactly the same chords. It's just with a different pedal. Like that. That's a sort of interesting little aside with these Imperials, because most of the time it's completely subsumed from the Imperial March, but of course here there's some little references to A New Hope, which I think is really good. All that little harp and celeste is completely omitted from the film, the recording. It was written down but not performed. So then we're ending up on a F sharp minor chord but with the C sharp in the bass. Again, a second inversion, as used to transition. You know, a transition second inversion. Let's just do that. And then we've got a slightly modified Droid theme. There's something rather sort of Poulenc about that, isn't there? Or even Prokofiev, sort of Peter and the Wolf type sort of thing. Especially with those sorts of false relations that we've got pretty close. In fact, it's not really a false relation. It's just one of the ways in which he sort of tends to, you know, write those intervals. Major seventh. And a sort of 3-3 outline. So it's when he wants to be a bit gnarly, he tends to sort of do that. But what's happening is that it's harmonised again hexatonically. So B with a flat 6. That's from a B hexatonic. And what's interesting, what gives us this hexatonic thing is that 7th at that point, which is there. That's just a little passing note. And even the E flat, and then we've got C as a stable chord tone all the way through. So regardless of what's happening in the bass, where it's just sort of little bits of sort of pizzicato. Whoops, I've gone wrong there. It's annoying me. It's still pretty much B hexatonic going to C hexatonic, sort of C minor, because it does change right at the end to this with a B flat. But in fact the B becomes a sort of leading note really to C. So we've got this sort of really nice sort of little droid theme as he's fixing that. And then we end up with a C pedal as it ends on a C as well. So that also gives us a little clue as to where things are going. So it's an interesting one, isn't it? We start at C sharp, we then move to a sort of A above it, then still C sharp, but sort of F sharp, with a sort of minor dominant going to B hexatonic, which then shifts to C hexatonic with the droid theme, and then goes on to a C pedal. But even that, you know, has other things going on. So we've got another Imperials derivation, which again appears right a little bit later on in the cue. So good example of wrong note bass which isn't semitonal. Well, it kind of is at the end, but not at the beginning, because here, that C, actually I guess it is semitonal, but because it is a semitone with the B. So I'm just going to go a good example of wrong note bass. Occasionally he does do things where it's not quite semitonal. That sort of idea. Tonal sort of wrong note. But generally speaking, if there is a wrong note, it's usually a semitone away from one of the three notes of the chord. So in this case, that's a semitone away from the B, which I can't play, which is there. And then when it ends up on the C sharp minor, we've got that semitone as well with the root note. So that just sort of, for a beat, just crescendos through, and then we've got a tertial shift to A minor, but in first inversion. And then a little sort of filigree, like that. It's almost sort of Bachian in that case, isn't it? And then it shifts down to C sharp minor, very clearly, with a nice, lightly spaced out chord, sort of classic Williams. Notice there's no C sharp at that bit. In fact, nobody's playing it. It's often the case where the doubled root doesn't necessarily exist, especially if he's wanting to create either warm sound or, in this case, sort of a warning sound. So then we've got a wonderful presentation of A minor with a major seventh. So it's that little G sharp at the end. But here, we've just got a dyadic version of it. Because if you look at closely, we've only got this in the bass. So we don't really quite... We don't have the full sort of E major chord. Because the B sort of almost disturbs that area. So we don't have that. But we do have that, which is the A minor with a major 7th and a G sharp on the bass. But it's just an interesting voice chord. So a classic sort of, I guess you would call it quite a classic way of writing it pianistically. And this is where it sort of translates directly to strings. But also notice the wide gap between the first violins, which are there, and the second violins there. There's actually quite a large distance. In fact, a minor 9th distance between the G sharp and the A. And that allows, because, and the reason for that is that it needs to create space for the bassoon, which is now very high, but it's in all the space that isn't occupied by the second violins or the second violins and the viola as well. So it actually allows for that space. It's good writing. Yeah, that's a good little tip. So then we've got another brief melodic moment releasing chord tones of the A Hungarian minor scale. So yeah, the only tone that's not is just that little auxiliary note D flat, but otherwise everything's in an A Hungarian minor. So that's important to know. And again, it's added evidence that he goes back to these scales time and time again, and in order to harmonize them, he knows the chords that work with them because they're part of the scale. So, you know, here that A minor with a major 7th. Well, guess what? We've got A, C, E, and the G sharp, so it all works. And even the B also works as well. So all of those notes work in A Hungarian minor. So yeah, maybe that's what it is, A Hungarian minor. So another tertial shift possibly from C sharp. But we end up with that sustained, and then a shift from A to C major, which is where we hear Han and Leia's theme. So we've got flutes and oboe on this one. And notice that lovely sort of cello line. And as it goes up, violas. Like that. It's a really nice little bit of movement, which is very, very useful, because if there isn't, it's just very static. But with the movement, like that, it just gives it that little bit of energy which it needs. Notice that the harp is on the second beat of the bar, where there's a long note. That's just a little bit of contrapuntal interest, but sort of done rather nicely. Like that. Really nice spacing. There's a lovely sense of sonority about Williams's chords. He really understands the instruments well, but also he understands sonority and where things should be. And, you know, creating little gaps with things is nice. You know, here we got quite low strings, so it's okay for this to come through because it's occupying space that's not played in here, and we've also got a long note which allows it to happen. So another really good compositional tip at that point. So in terms of the harmony, we just got a baddie C major chord. In fact, I need to probably just put that in. Missed that one. And then we've got this chord. So an A flat chord with a sharp 4. And then D flat above C. I'm not called it D flat major 7 because it just doesn't sound like one. And then we got D flat 7 going to C, which is just a big appoggiatura really, as the bassoons join in. And then suddenly the horns take over back to C sharp minor. And then we're into C sharp minor still, but in first inversion. And then we got this sort of really interesting little theme. And I haven't seen this in Frank's catalogue. Maybe it's because I'm blind and I can't see it. Or maybe he's just not included it because it's not really significant enough to warrant any additional work on. But it's an interesting sort of little dyadic theme. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Boba Fett theme, but I'm not sure why. There's no reason why it should be. It's a distinctive thing in itself. Like that. But we're all sort of in minor thirds at that point, above this sort of C sharp minor segment. Also, just that very small amount of percussion. There's almost zero percussion in the whole thing. There's a small amount of timp, just to give it a little bit of added weight. But apart from that, that's pretty much it, apart from the sort of Presto section, which we're coming to, where Chewie doesn't take kindly to Lando's offer. Yeah, so we've got this sort of thing. Let's call it Lando's warning. You know, I mean, not sure it's a warning, but let's just call it a little Lando theme. And then we've got a reflection of that as it sort of moves up into a different key. So here we got D minor with a flat 6. Notice that that is coming back again, just to give it some added weight, because we just got long notes. So if you just have long notes, just doesn't sound very interesting. Bum 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 ba. Now it sounds interesting because I've got some rhythm, which is what happens in the double bass part, as well as the cello part having those little semiquavers as well. So the horns taking the upper extension of that, they're not included in the B flat. And it's a little technique which I've noticed that Rimsky talks about, which is where you have an octave above the bass, but in the horns and not the trombones. So it's a nice little bit, and in fact there are no tubas in this particular cue, which is also quite unusual actually. And also they're muted, so they sound a little bit fainter against the just a sort of open horn. In fact, these bits I think are bassoons, so I am slightly wrong there. So in this case, the bassoons are replacing the function of the horns, which is an interesting slight deviation from Rimsky, in fact. Mostly he would have a horn or two horns probably for the balance, 2 horns to 1 trombone as always. But in this case, he's got D, the third bassoon, so it just gives it that little bit of filler, I guess. So exactly the same thing, it's just upper semitone at this point. So that continues, and then we got this sort of lovely chord, which is half dim C, and then suddenly we're into this presto subito. So it's not that fast. There we go. But it's just enough to sort of give us that feeling of excitement. Notice that the strings suddenly, having had normal duplets, now go in more intense. Digga, 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 ba, boom, like that. So in terms of chords, that familiar sound, 521. So this is 2 minor triads, a minor third apart. Like that, but in this case the reverse, so minor 6 apart. So in fact, yeah, major third apart or a minor 6 apart. And then he's done exactly the same thing, but slightly differently as well, but it's the same chord. Or the same chord pitch class. But still 2 minor triads, a major third apart. You can see that, or a minor 6 apart. So a nice little tip, and notice how, because the B maybe sounds too harsh again below the C, and also it's quite high for the horn, so he's kept that in second inversion instead of going just straight up, which he could have done that, but he chose to do that because it seems to be better voice leading. And then the E can just remain the same, and then that can go down a tone as well. So a good little tip like that, and all of that is just sort of basically taken from little Hungarian minor scales. One is C sharp, one is E. And I've decided to take the bottom extension as that, just because mostly things work harmonically from the bass upwards rather than downwards. So that's the thought process behind it. Whether I'm right or wrong or not, it's a different matter. And then he's got this almost pseudo-Uranus motif, rather. But it's also, almost that as well. So it's a sort of, it's a little link. And then we have this sort of selection of notes. He uses that quite a lot. It's a set 3/8. And it's actually a sort of Italian sixth as well. Which Italian sixths happen very frequently in the Phantom Menace, but not particularly in this one. But it's a very good thematic link, or non-thematic link. And then we got D pedal. So that's all that information down there. And then so semitonal, let's just go usual semitonal wrong note bass. So in this case, that is a semitone above the root note, like that. And again, we got that little Imperials theme. And then, right at the very end, we got this lovely Han and Leia theme as well. So the D pedal continues. Like that, and it doesn't quite finish above that D pedal. Now, if I just play the Han and Leia tune, this is interesting. It seems to be in G, but this is all harmonised completely differently. So it's that sort of sad Han and Leia. Why are they doing this to us? I don't know. They never ask me any questions. It's this sort of like, why are they just being mean for the sake of it? That's the Imperials for you, though, isn't it? And this little add 4 as well. So it's just a nice little alternative harmonisation of that theme. Notice that the bass is not doubled anywhere else. There's no need for that. This is just strings at this point. And then we've got sort of cor anglais, clarinet, bassoon, an octave lower. And yeah, a little bit of an A flat at that point. So it's sort of C minor with a sharp 4, but also it's got a little flat 6 with it as well. So I'm just going to add that to it. There we go. Let's just turn off magnetic stuff, because that's just supremely irritating sometimes. Make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Lots of notes. It's got literally all of those. So yeah, a nice little cue. Just lots of sort of little spots of interest in this one. Mostly sort of nice little thematic moments. So I've really enjoyed that. And after that, it's carbon freeze. It's getting really serious at that point, which I'm very much looking forward to bringing to you. So yeah, that's all for now, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it'd be interesting to get some feedback about this keyboard. Is it making a difference, or is it getting in the way? I'd like to know. So do give me a shout if you'd like to. So that's all for now, and I will see you soon.